In the heart of New York City, a tall glass building shimmered in the sunlight, home to one of the biggest tech corporations in the country. The company was buzzing that morning, but not because of excitement, because of panic. A new software system they had spent millions developing had suddenly crashed. Investors were furious. Deadlines were slipping away, and the entire board was on edge. The failure meant a loss that could climb past $100 million, a disaster that could sink careers and destroy reputations. Down in the lobby, Maria Johnson, the company's quietest employee, was mopping the floor like she did every day. Maria was a cleaner. She didn't wear expensive suits or carry sleek laptops. She wore an old pair of sneakers, gloves, and a plain uniform. Most executives never even looked at her. But today, she was worried, not for herself, but for her son, Elijah. He often came by after school, waiting for her to finish her shift. He was only 19, yet he had a way of seeing the world differently. That morning, Elijah sat quietly in the corner of the lobby with a backpack and a notebook full of scribbles. He noticed the panic. Engineers running, executives shouting, phones ringing nonstop. He asked his mother what was happening, and she shook her head, saying it wasn't their business. But Elijah's curiosity lit up. He had always been fascinated with computers, teaching himself from free courses online because his mother couldn't afford college fees. When one frustrated engineer stormed into the lobby, muttering about unsolvable code errors, Elijah's ears perked up. He leaned forward, listening carefully. "They've been stuck on it for weeks," the man groaned, dropping his head into his hands. Elijah hesitated, then spoke softly. "Maybe I can help." The engineer looked at him, stunned. "Kid, this problem is worth $100 million. Do you even know what you're talking about?" Elijah didn't flinch. His eyes carried a quiet confidence. What happened next would soon echo through every floor of the company. The engineer gave Elijah a skeptical glance, then waved him off. "Look, kid, we got the best coders in the country upstairs. They've been working around the clock. If they can't fix it, you sure can't." He stood up, ready to leave, but Elijah didn't back down. "Maybe they're too close to the problem," he said calmly. "Sometimes fresh eyes see what experts miss." The words made the engineer pause. Something in Elijah's tone, confident but not arrogant, struck him. "Fine," the man muttered, half in frustration, half in amusement. "Come with me, but don't expect anyone to take you seriously." As Elijah followed him through the sleek hallways, Maria's heart pounded. She wanted to call him back, to stop him from embarrassing himself. But she knew her son. That look in his eyes meant he wasn't about to quit. Upstairs, chaos ruled. Dozens of programmers were hunched over glowing screens, muttering about broken lines of code, corrupted data, and deadlines slipping away by the hour. The CEO, Richard Bennett, a sharp-suited man in his 50s, stood at the head of the room, his jaw tight with stress. Investors were blowing up his phone, demanding answers. His career, his reputation, the future of the company, all of it was hanging by a thread. When the engineer pushed Elijah into the room, several heads turned. Confused whispers rippled across the space. "Who's the kid? Why is he here? We don't have time for games." Richard's glare cut across the room. "What is this?" he barked. The engineer stammered, Sir, this kid says he might have a solution." The room erupted in laughter. Some programmers rolled their eyes. Others scoffed openly. "Great, we're doomed. And now we'll let interns fix it?" One muttered. Richard raised a hand, silencing the room. His voice was sharp. "You're wasting my time. Get him out of here." But Elijah didn't move. His calm gaze met the CEO's. "If I can't solve it in under a minute, I'll walk out and you'll never see me again. But if I can, you'll give me 5 minutes to explain." The boldness in his voice froze the room. Even Richard hesitated. No one had dared speak to him like that before. The air in the room grew heavy. Dozens of eyes locked on Elijah, half expecting him to crumble under the weight of Richard Bennett's glare. The CEO studied him, trying to decide if this was arrogance or courage. Finally, with a dry laugh, Richard crossed his arms. 1 minute? Fine. Show me." A programmer shoved a laptop toward Elijah, muttering, "This'll be fun." Elijah slid into the chair, his fingers trembling slightly as he opened the error logs. For a few seconds, he just stared, letting the lines of code flow across the screen like a foreign language only he could understand. The room buzzed with whispers. He doesn't even know what he's looking at. What a waste of time. But then, Elijah's fingers began to fly across the keyboard. His movements weren't frantic or random. They were precise, confident. He scanned thousands of lines of code with astonishing speed, spotting something the others had overlooked. There, he murmured to himself, almost too quiet to hear. He adjusted a few lines, restructured a faulty loop, and then tapped the Enter key. The system paused. Everyone leaned forward. A loading bar that had been frozen for weeks suddenly flickered to life, processing smoothly without a hitch. Screens across the room lit up with green confirmations. The broken program wasn't broken anymore. It was running perfectly. Gasps erupted. One engineer clutched his head. Another cursed under his breath. The laughter had vanished, replaced by stunned silence. Elijah leaned back, exhaling softly. That was it. Just a recursive loop stuck in a feedback cycle. Simple, really. Richard Bennett's jaw dropped. He stepped closer, staring at the screen like it was a miracle. Our team couldn't find that in weeks, he muttered. And you, what's your name, kid? Elijah Johnson, he replied steadily. My mom works downstairs. She cleans your lobby. The room froze again, this time not in disbelief of the code, but the truth that hit them like a slap. The genius who had just solved their $100 million disaster wasn't a polished programmer from an Ivy League school. He was the son of a cleaner. Richard's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, a strange smile tugged at the corner of his lips. The room felt like it had tilted on its axis. Engineers who had mocked Elijah minutes ago now stared at him as if he were a puzzle they couldn't solve. Some looked impressed, others embarrassed. Richard Bennett remained silent, his sharp eyes never leaving the boy's face. Elijah Johnson, Richard repeated slowly, as though testing the weight of the name. 19 years old, no degree, no credentials. And yet you just saved this company from bleeding out $100 million in losses. Elijah simply nodded, his hands folded neatly in his lap. He wasn't arrogant, wasn't gloating. He just sat calmly, as if what he had done wasn't extraordinary. The lead programmer, a man with graying hair and tired eyes, finally spoke. How? How did you even see that? We combed through every possible root cause. We ran simulations. We tore it apart line by line. Elijah shrugged slightly. You were looking for something complicated. Sometimes the biggest problems hide in the smallest details. I just see patterns differently. The answer only deepened the silence. It wasn't just luck. This kid had a gift. Richard straightened, tugging at his suit jacket. Clear the room, he commanded. No hesitation, no explanation. Everyone scrambled out, leaving only Richard, Elijah, and the engineer who had brought him upstairs. The CEO paced for a long moment, then stopped directly in front of Elijah. Do you understand what you've done? Not just for us, but for yourself. His voice carried a weight that felt more like a warning than praise. Elijah looked him in the eye. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just wanted to help. Richard's laugh was low, almost dangerous. Help? Son, you just walked into the lion's den and stole the kill from under its nose. People spend decades chasing recognition in this industry. You solved in seconds what destroyed their sleep for weeks. Do you think they'll forgive you? Elijah tilted his head. I didn't take anything from them. The solution was always there. They just didn't see it. The CEO studied him quietly, his expression unreadable. Then, with sudden decisiveness, Richard leaned forward and whispered words that would shock not just Elijah, but the entire company. Richard's voice dropped low, almost conspiratorial. You've just become the most dangerous person in this building. Elijah frowned, unsure if he had heard correctly. Dangerous? I just fixed a problem. That's exactly why, Richard replied sharply. You embarrassed my best engineers. You showed investors that a teenager with no degree is sharper than the team I pay millions for. That kind of truth doesn't stay quiet. It spreads. And when it spreads, it threatens power. My power. Their power. The words landed like a stone in Elijah's chest. He hadn't thought of it that way. To him, it was only about solving something broken. But Richard saw it as a disruption, a shift in control. Here's what's going to happen, Richard continued, his tone icy. I'll take credit for the fix. I'll tell the board our team figured it out. You'll keep quiet. Go back to whatever life you had before this, and no one will ever know. Elijah blinked in disbelief. You want me to lie? Richard's jaw tightened. I want you to survive. You think this world rewards honesty? No, it rewards leverage. And right now, you don't have any. Before Elijah could respond, the door opened. Maria stood there, clutching her cleaning cart. Her eyes darted nervously between her son and the CEO. She had overheard enough to understand. Please, Mr. Bennett, she said softly. My boy didn't mean any harm. Don't punish him for being gifted. For a brief second, Richard's expression softened as he looked at the woman who had silently served his company for years. But then the steel returned to his gaze. This isn't about punishment, he said coldly. It's about control. Elijah rose from his chair, his voice steady despite the storm building inside him. If you're afraid of a kid with a notebook, maybe you're not as powerful as you think. The room froze. Richard's eyes flared with something between anger and admiration. For the first time in years, Richard Bennett found himself speechless. No one, certainly not a 19-year-old kid, had ever dared talk to him that way. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth, but it was laced with menace. You got fire, Elijah. Fire burns bright, but also burns out fast if you're not careful. Maria stepped forward, her voice trembling. Sir, please, he's just a boy. Richard snapped his gaze to her. No, he's not just a boy. He's a threat or an opportunity. And I don't let opportunities walk out of my office. He turned back to Elijah. You want recognition? You want a future? Fine. I'll offer you one. Work for me. Right here. Today. I'll pay you more than your mother makes in 10 years. The offer hit the air like a thunderclap. Maria's hands gripped her cart, her knuckles white. Elijah's mind raced. A chance to step out of the shadows, to finally do something bigger than himself. But at what cost? He met Richard's eyes. And if I say no? Richard leaned in, lowering his voice to a growl. Then I'll bury your name before it even rises. No one will believe a janitor's son solved what my entire company couldn't. You'll disappear back into the noise. Invisible. The cruelty of the word stung, but Elijah didn't flinch. He thought of his mother, who had sacrificed everything so he could have a chance at something greater. He thought of the engineers who laughed at him, the people who never once looked his way because of where he came from. And now, standing in front of the most powerful man in the building, Elijah realized something. He wasn't afraid. You think control makes you untouchable, Elijah said slowly. But power built on lies always crumbles. The CEO's smirk vanished. For the first time, his mask cracked. He didn't like being challenged, and he especially didn't like that Elijah's words rang true. The tension in the room grew thick, as if the walls themselves were listening. Richard straightened, his voice colder than ever. Then I'll make sure the choice you just made destroys you. Richard's words hung in the air like a death sentence. Maria gasped softly, clutching Elijah's arm as if she could shield him from the power radiating off the CEO. But Elijah stood firm, his jaw set, his eyes unshaken. He had been underestimated all his life. This moment was no different, except now he had proof of his worth. The office door suddenly burst open. A group of board members rushed in, their faces pale and sweaty. Richard, one of them barked. The investors are demanding an update. They're threatening to pull out if we don't have answers in the next hour. Richard straightened instantly, slipping back into his polished mask. Tell them the issue is resolved, he said smoothly. One of the directors frowned. Resolved? How? Our engineers have reported. His voice trailed off as he noticed Elijah standing near the desk. Who's this? Before Richard could speak, the engineer who had brought Elijah upstairs blurted out, He's the one who fixed it. The room went silent. The board members exchanged stunned looks. A kid, one whispered. The engineer nodded. In less than a minute. The disbelief turned into something else. Hope, relief, even admiration. They crowded closer, bombarding Elijah with questions. How did you do it? Where did you learn? Can you join the team? Richard's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected his board to hear the truth so quickly. He raised a hand, trying to seize control. Enough. This boy doesn't understand the scale of what he stumbled into. We'll handle the rest. But Elijah spoke up, his voice steady and clear. I didn't stumble. I knew what I was doing. And I'm not here to be erased or hidden. My name is Elijah Johnson, and I solved your problem when no one else could. The words struck like lightning. The board members stared at him, then slowly turned their eyes to Richard. Doubt spread across their faces. For years, Richard had been the unshakable leader, the one who always had the answers. But now, a cleaner sun had exposed cracks in his power. Richard's fists clenched at his sides. He had built an empire on control. And in one afternoon, a 19-year-old had put it all at risk. The boardroom was no longer Richard's domain. The air shifted, the balance of power sliding away from the man in the tailored suit toward the boy who stood with nothing but quiet conviction. The directors whispered among themselves, glancing at Elijah with something Richard hadn't anticipated: respect. One board member, a woman with sharp eyes and decades of experience, finally spoke. Richard, this company just dodged catastrophe because of him. Investors don't care about pedigrees or degrees. They care about results. And this young man delivered. Richard's face darkened. He's a child. He doesn't understand the industry, the politics, the stakes. But he understands the code, another board member interrupted firmly. And that's what saved us. Maybe what we need isn't another polished resume, but real talent. The words hit Richard like a blow. For years, he had built walls of prestige, money, and connections to keep outsiders out. And now, those walls were crumbling in front of a janitor's son. Maria's eyes filled with tears, pride shining brighter than fear. She squeezed Elijah's hand. You did this, she whispered. You proved them wrong. Richard tried one last time to seize control. If you put your faith in this boy, you'll regret it. He's not one of us. Elijah took a deep breath, his voice steady but powerful. You're right. I'm not one of you. I didn't grow up with privilege. I don't wear a suit or sit in corner offices. But maybe that's exactly why I saw what you couldn't. Because I don't see problems as impossible. I see them as puzzles waiting to be solved. Silence followed, deep and undeniable. Then, slowly, the board members began to nod. One by one, they turned away from Richard and toward Elijah. Richard's empire hadn't fallen in a day. But in that moment, its foundation cracked. Later that evening, as Elijah and Maria walked out of the towering glass building, the city lights sparkled like a promise. He had stepped into a world that never wanted him, solved a problem worth $100 million, and faced down a man who ruled with fear. The future was uncertain, but one truth was clear. Elijah Johnson was no longer invisible. He was a name the world would remember.